World's a humming, system's gonna overload. We got clusters making magic in the line. Funkified computing.
Hello, this is Ed Fullman,
and Fabrizio Sgura.
and we're here to talk about cluster funk.
Definitely. It was a lot of time we talked about other things, but today we talk about cluster funk.
And specifically, we're talking about multiple clusters today. So I guess you could call that multi-funk.
I think so. multi-fun, and multi-funk. Also, DevOps teams will not have fun when they set up multi-clusters.
So it's fun for the business, not fun for the DevOps guys. But it's one of these topics where it's just the nature of a good set of clusters is going to be that at some point, because you're doing such a great job, they're going to ask you for multiple clusters hooked together, multi-tenant.
Let's say you have 10 fingers, you just used one, please add the other 9.
Right.
And then you start learning piano, guitar, the drums, everything.
So if you're counting, this is episode 8. I guess just a couple of other kind of thoughts from the business side. It's, I think you and I both have had experiences where we start small, from scratch in a green field, and as you go, reality starts showing up, right? You end up with you start out building it for one customer, and then you end up with multi-tenant platforms, right? You start building on Amazon, and you end up needing to be on Azure as well. Like, that's not a big deal. And and then people immediately start talking about, well, this client's different than this client, so we need them on their own cluster, or we need them on this high performance cluster, or something like that. All to all things that are get you to this place where multi-funk is what happens when you're successful. And also, when you get to some physical limitation or some kind of business limitation. I actually think multi-funk it's all about salespeople. They're the ones that cause the problem in the first place. They sell some kind of special capability, and then we have to deliver on that, and that gets us to more than one cluster a lot of times.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed. I think that if we look at now, our topic is multi-clustering, but I will come back to Kubernetes in example, and think that Kubernetes is our instrument, like the bass. If you have the bass is not supposed to play funk music. It's just supposed to play notes. But if you want to play slap bass or techniques that are complex, then Kubernetes, like the bass, will become complex depending on what you want to do. It simplified a lot of things in the past. It can simplify more things, but isolation is optional in terms of Kubernetes when you think about it like a tool that you can use. And multi-tenant is not just about sharing, it's about control, because just extending the resources that you want to use will not satisfy the real customer usage. You need control on top of that. We talked about control planes in Kubernetes, extending the ability of isolating the clusters. but really what everyone needs to do is control at the top level, like the one that we are working. Controlling everything is like knowing the instruments at a level that is mastery. And for that reason, if we don't design blast radius upfront, production will design it for you. And that is something that, like you said, we could depend on sales if they design the plan for us with their limitations and their ability to get visionary views, we will not be consistent. So I think that isolation is a business requirement. And since the word business is for you, I think you have an idea on how we could talk about business requirements with
Yeah,
isolation.
yeah. I think in general, it starts with it can start with risk reduction. It can also start with um, a new client that's the result of a sales effort, and now you've got to deal with more clients than you had before. So, do you cohabitate or not? And there's good reasons to have like a cohabitation of clients on one cluster environment as a multi-tenant kind of space where everybody's given maybe the same or near same kind of capabilities, and they pay for it that way. But on the other hand, you've got other influencers. You know, the enterprises, depending on who they are and what kind of applications are running on that cluster, they're going to come at it from the perspective of risk and say, how much risk can we absorb? And for example, if I don't split this account, this client, across multiple clusters and one of them goes down and I have no way to keep them alive and running, um, that may be a risk that someone's willing to take, and another client might be willing to pay more to not have that risk, or even inside of one enterprise. So, there's that kind of issue. In the regulated industries that we work in, like life sciences, the complexity of passing an audit where you have two clients trying to maintain separation from the whole world, to protect the patients that they're working on, or they have in their systems. That's going to end up being another driver where I can't have both of those clients on the same system, and I can't put something experimental that has not been audited on the same system as people that are on an audited kind of running, and HIPAA required environment. So, um, I think the other challenge that we've seen before is, um, clients sometimes expect real separation. It just becomes part of their DNA. It can come from regulated environments, and it can come from risk adverse environments. And then, sometimes companies merge, and when they merge, well, now you're throwing two clusters together, and you have to, take company A and company B and merge their processes and probably spread applications all over the place. So, um, the risk of isolating these customers is that they can, when there's a failure, it doesn't show up as, a bug. It shows up as, lost trust that they've put into us, and we didn't protect them, for some reason. And it's not just paranoia. This kind of stuff. It's a real thing. It's a real business responsibility, and a fiduciary one in some cases when you have an SLA, right? When you have an SLA and you're trying to manage against it, um, you could take risks, but whether you can get clients to agree to those risks or not, you're putting them in a situation where your ability to manage an SLA can be really difficult, if not impossible. So
you disagree the agreement. That's interesting.
So the demand is pretty clear. I mean, it's written all over. The reason I brought up sales is it's written all over the website that you're selling a multi-cluster service. From an enterprise perspective, it's written all over your budget and your plan for the enterprise and the expectations. So I think success in whatever form, whether it's about building some applications and a platform, or it's about just building an IT solution for a single enterprise. Either way, you're going to end up facing this reality if you're successful, especially when you're successful. And a good example, which we both saw at a KubeCon a few years ago, was the discussion about Datadog, which is a very public problem that they had. And, they were showing their environment, which I don't think anybody had seen up to that point outside of Datadog. And lots of clusters in the same environment. And they were doing fine. In fact, the meeting that we went to at KubeCon, I think that was 23, 24, probably 2024. The message they were giving and the presentation they were giving is how fast they got back up on their feet after a massive full outage of the entire business. And it was an impressive story. So what do you think about all that, Fabrizio? You're the one that I sell it, got to deliver it. So what do you think?
I remember that I was not at that KubeCon. I think it was Chicago when you had that conversation. And when that happened to Datadog, they lost everything. But they were also able to recover. So generally, when you recover from failure, it's just a matter of strategy. And in terms of strategy, one cluster could be not enough. It's not just about distribution. We talked about distributed systems versus something like single clusters. Then there are the models that are cooperative cluster. If someone is doing multi-clustering with Istio, in example, when a single cluster fails, it could be replaced by another that is cooperatively working. But we have also seen other kind of examples where we have edge clusters that are working with a cloud cluster. And single clusters fails generally for three reasons. The first one is scaling. We are always out of resources, and for that reason, we have to move something. And when moving, we are not as resilient as expected. Then we have the security problem you were mentioning about isolation, complying with service level agreements, and sanity. Something could happen that is not just in our hands, that is out of our control, and it's because we are using third party provisioning resources. And at that point, it's like the fact that adding nodes to the cluster is really easy, but untangling policy, it is not. So what we do personally, I prefer to use some solutions that are considering clusters on top of Kubernetes like Rancher with K3S and RK2. We already talked about why they matter. They matter because they are a solid solution. I mentioned earlier the edge case, and I find that SUSE Edge is a platform that is effectively considering all of this scalability, also when the edge devices are independently acting for some time and they are communicating with the centralized platform with some kind of requirements. But when you talk also about multi-tenant, the isolation that Kubernetes could provide could not be enough with what is the real application that you are running on top of that. So K3S, we know it shines at the edge, it's small, fast, opinionated. There is also something else that is called K0S now that is not running the control plane. It's not SUSE, but it's something that it's trendy for Raspberry Pis and other solutions that you can run at the edge. RKE2 is built for compliance, heavy and production first environments. So you can have all the things that we were talking about, service level agreement supplied by the effective Kubernetes distribution that you are using because someone else is thinking about that requirement for you. So Rancher Kubernetes Engine 2 or RKE2 is built for that. And different clusters for different jobs is not fragmentation, it's specialization. I would like to think about the revolutionary world of microservices when we were coming out from monolithics and we were thinking about what was the main task of a microservice, where was the limitation. And then when we introduced Docker containers, we wanted to isolate a container to a specific service. Now the sizing is what can I do with the cluster? Could it be used for only authentication? Can I extend it by namespacing the resources? Can I specialize it for a tenant? And at that point, the answer that you can overextend the concept of what was a specialization for a single activity to a specialization for a single context. Also, this word context is very trendy in AI. Probably it's very important to consider that. I think that from the perspective of financial ed, enterprises are thinking the same in specialization.
Yeah, I think generally it's less risky if you don't have all your systems running on one big environment. So some focus on specialization at a point in the scaling process gets you to a place where you're going to have the best possible cost reflected in the right amount of hardware and environment to run it on, right? So if you have super intensive processes that are kind of the core business, keeping that separated and broken down into multiple clusters is going to get you to a place where you can afford it better. And I think aligning things around business boundaries is probably also a reasonable thing to think about from a security perspective and other perspectives. If you don't really need some kind of full alignment, right? Then you don't really need to have the systems together in that environment, right? If they don't really communicate with each other and don't need to. So how do you think we can get around that, or what's your approaches here for getting around that network challenge for all this?
For the multi-clustering, really, it's so extended that we can choose several approaches. Choosing, in example, the Calico CNI versus the Cilium CNI, both of them, they have solutions for interfacing the network, which is the only way to communicate from one part of the world to another. And generally, you will use something that is embedding security outside of Kubernetes, like it could be the kernel WireGuard module from the Linux capabilities, and then create a kind of VPN system where a multi-cluster breaks most people, and networking, it's a real case, but we need to find a way to consolidate that networking in something that is working homogeneously. like it is for the internet. There are several parts in the internet that are communicating each other, or a cloud provider. They have several regions. How they do to create a VPC peering, in example. They create a specific set of rules. The connection and transport layer is left to additional resources that in Kubernetes we can abstract via the CNI, the container network interface, and whatever we choose for that. We could use a native CNI like Flannel, but with Calico or Cilium, we have more abilities to perform the configuration that we need. And then with WireGuard, we used in the past something like Kilo, but Calico and Cilium are also equipped with WireGuard module and communication. We ensure that that VPN network is using pre-shared keys, so it is secured by default. It is using UDP protocol, so by datagram, it's fast instead of being TCP controlled, like it could be for, in example, the OpenVPN TCP network configuration that is slower compared to what we have available in the UDP context. And the goal isn't everything talks to everything. So we need to be selective. We need to be sure that security is not lost because of a wide communication. And then we adjust network policy on top of that. We need to isolate by this main configuration that is on top of Kubernetes. And then the application layer will be managed safely. So what I was telling earlier, that the main problem is communication among applications of several tenants can be done only if you have a solid network structure that is filtered. And here the goal is, again, intentionally the communication. So we need to ensure that we are able to reach everything by protecting the reachability with encryption or whatever you use for security of the VPN. In this case, WireGuard is a very good allied resource for Kubernetes. And then we go for the network plan that we want. Every ungoverned network path is a future incident report. If you don't think earlier about what you are doing and configuring, it will probably be something that will come back as a Damocles sword. So it will be standing there ready to fall on your head. I don't know if you know the myth of Damocles, but
Yeah, we do.
for
Yeah,
people here, they could investigate that.
yeah.
And just to finish, to conclude that, YAML doesn't care about what customers are doing.
Sure.
So you have a way to describe everything, but in a sort of declarative way, and you need to be consistent in that declaration model. I
Yeah,
think that you could talk about fleet.
yeah.
Why not?
I think Fleet is a good place to go next. I mean, it's an example. There are other solutions besides Fleet out there, but a way to do GitOps and kind of manage your workload from a Git perspective, manage your workloads, manage what's on those workloads and how they're deployed out in the world. You know, that control plane is could be Fleet. Fleet's one of the solutions that we work with from SUSE and Rancher. And I think it's as people get into this place where they're doing it by hand and they've got a lot of script files and they say we don't need Fleet, we don't need to go that far, like it's overdoing it or something to do it that way. That's true until somebody accidentally, people make accidents all that happen all the time. They don't mean to, but somebody types in the wrong information and boom, right? That's the reason that you should have had Fleet right there. And if you're in the middle of a deploy, there's going to be a lot of crying that evening, right? So this is a good place for a story of the week. So I remember it was 1982. I was a sysadmin at a bank, and I used to have this boss who would hover, and by that I mean stand behind you as you were at this console managing this whole thing working, way back in the 3090 and 360, 370 timeframe IBM systems. And back in those days, like, you could get in all sorts of trouble with making typing mistakes. You could bring the whole system down pretty easily.
You remember the icy sweat that you were having when hitting the wrong command.
Yeah.
Now I'm not experimenting that anymore because there is always a solution. But at that time,
yeah. Well, I used to have this boss who would stand behind us, and he would see you typing. You would put one letter in that was wrong, and before you could even backspace, he would reach over your shoulder and backspace for you, as if he saved you. Which maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I think we're kind of kidding around about this stuff. But it's the advantage of fleet. One of the advantages I see from a overall business perspective is that it's very auditable, right? You can look what happened and you can see what you've created and deployed and so forth, and you're absolutely sure. You're not hunting around for information trying to figure out how you ran it. But what do you think about it? You've actually done the work on it.
Yeah, I remember that me and you, we were having a conversation. This was in another KubeCon, because fleet, no, we want Argo, we want another one, we wanted whatever to do a control plane for continuous integration. Everything has a context. So when we have a fleet of clusters, it seems like the name is giving you the solution. It's not Flux, it's not Argo. Maybe one day there will be another tool that will be at the same level. Fleet is something that is still not mature, but SUSE is putting a lot of effort on that. And it's not just because we were talking about Rancher and the SUSE bundle, but because fleet treats clusters as a fleet, not snowflakes. So that is done only by this tool with all the requirements that we have on top of the configuration that we need to manage the things that evolve. So it's very important that we use an up-to-date version of that specific application. When we have the same application for customers, so we are providers at scale and we are multi-tenant available solutions, we need to do the same application with different configurations for each customer that we are providing that service, and fleet is zero drama. So drift becomes visible, but only to the team that knows what drift is and how it has to be managed. It is fixable. You can find something declaratively in a YAML context, and whatever is the configuration for the application, it depends on the customer environment variable, in example. That could be a differentiator between several customers. That could be thousands of customers. And that will be something specific, not an either or an or, but it's I look there because I get familiar with the model and I can manage 1,000 of same customers that are using the same model. So I can do that with just one person or with just one agent looking at that configuration. I think that after thinking about fleet and how boring in production could be success, I would say that, yeah.
Boring is good.
Yeah, boring. You remember that when we did production releases, we always had an interaction that was more humoristic than painful, because otherwise it will become boring when everyone is working. You will say, oh, I have to do nothing, just automating. But at the end of the game, you will be enjoying that bore a lot. And if we move the context now to what is namespacing in Kubernetes, we see that the security of namespaces will become something where we look at for the configuration that we want to use as an isolation. So namespaces are table stakes, not really fortress. They are not boundaries that are uncrossable, but thanks to Kubernetes, they can be a consistent limit from the configuration perspective. Namespaces are resources that really cannot be permissioned like the others in the cluster. They are really assigned to an admin cluster role because they can be created only by administrators. That need that you have inside namespaces, you need role-based access control, quotas, network policies, whatever more you need inside Kubernetes is a resource that generally is namespace-based, not cluster-based. And namespaces don't stop kernel level risk. So you still have that part that is under the cluster that could be affecting you, but namespaces are generated and configured inside the kernel. It's thanks to the Linux kernel that we can have namespacing. I remember that at the beginning of Docker, they were trying to do namespacing in 2015 and later, but we were always using the Docker daemon with the root user because namespacing, that specific set of resources, was quite hard until Fedora invented or developed Podman the right way. So we had more rootless approach. In Kubernetes, we can do rootless containers. And namespaces will not solve our noisy neighbors. So it will still be there, everything that was. But they are a layer, not an answer, a layer that if we don't use consistently, will not give us the ability of using multi-tenancy as we need and expect. So you heard a lot the word namespaces with me talking to you, Ed. What do you think about this kind of site where you sit and reside as the namespace is?
I think the namespace capability is it's it's a protection. It's like a basic approach to like being safe that you get as part of the solution, which is fantastic. Um, I think you could liken it to like seatbelts in a car. I mean, I'm
Uh-huh.
old enough to remember when you didn't have seatbelts in cars and people hit the brakes and the entire family like lunged in
It
into the.
happened to me the other day in Los Angeles. My wife told me put the seatbelt, and I didn't. And then the driver hit the brake like that way, and I was catapulted in front of him.
It's not fun.
So
It's not fun.
no, I remember that
The bad.
seatbelts are a great discovery.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think namespace is going to keep you from having a problem, having an accident. It's just the namespace is going to keep you from or make it possible for you to walk away from it and survive what, inevitably could happen, right? So I think the pattern, the architectural pattern here that actually works is something layered. It's a little bit more complex than just one thing, which makes sense. But you have to in the pattern, I think you have to think about organizational boundaries, which we've talked about, um, cluster boundaries, which are a little bit less clear, but something that is part of the pattern. I mean, it's more complex to think through that. Um, and then namespace boundaries. And then lastly is like workload boundaries. And that all gets you to this, set of patterns. I think the challenge, if you're not in a platform business, right, is that these aren't things that you like have to like deal with every day. In other words, like, you know, you go through like periods of growth and things like that, and you have to address, you know, go back and look at what you are doing from a strategy perspective. In a platform business, which a lot of companies are in, this is your this is something that you have to manage at some level every day. You have to look at like how close you are to the edge of boundaries that you had planned out. So you have to align all of this as a business with, you know, how much isolation you need, you know, what kind of and how does that relate um, to revenues, risks, regulation, maybe reputation, uh, as well as just kind of focusing on making it boring, right? Like if you're really like using that as your goal, like we want a boring, everything works like clockwork. We press a button and it all happens. Somebody comes in for an audit and you just like send them a link, you know, all that kind of thing, which would be fantastic to have, is really, I think, a goal. But at the other side of that goal, like, you know, paying for, you know, that much automation and solution and isolation, it's, you know, it could mount up and you could burn a lot of money on that as well. So there's a need here to find, you know, a better balance, I think. And, you know, don't under isolate and not don't over isolate in your strategy for, you know, multiple clusters.
Yeah, I think that you can isolate a strategy very resume that could be a management cluster for control, workload clusters for execution, and this will be where everything happens really. And then we will have also shared services, but shared fate is not the right option when you talk about shared services. So this could be a differentiator for the configuration and what we want to expose. This is not a theory, but it's probably how you can sleep at night. Because if you do the right boundaries, you are probably able to create the correct strategy for having multi-clustering. And what I was talking at the beginning, what I was mentioning about cooperative mode or edge mode, sparse clusters mode, where the communication layer is really what you are searching to tune, to personalize depending on the services that you are exposing. These are all strategies that are not really something that you invent as a standard, but you design ad hoc on top of a solution. And this will probably give you that ability to have multi-tenant without multi headaches. That is something that probably Ed you will like.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've had both headaches. I've had the isolated everything in one headache and the distributed everything distributed headache. You know,
Oh, that's great.
yeah,
Master
the
of headaches.
master of headaches. Yeah, I mean, I think the goal of all this isn't to create a complex environment that people don't understand or try to scare people. Um, there's a term, there's an acronym, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which some salespeople like to use. I try not to be that person, but um, you know, they always talk about the downsides and, you know, how things are going to be bad and you need to protect. And it's, you know, I think that you can't go through life expecting that you're not going to have, you know, problems. So
It's all about risk management,
yeah, I think it is.
always.
And, you know, I think that if you do it right and it's boring enough, then, you know, the architecture will just not be front and center as the big risk, right? So it doesn't, I mean, you know, I'd like to believe that heroics aren't necessary because they are in the beginning, right? But when you get to scale, that shouldn't be your operating plan. Like there's a hero that's going to save everybody.
Yeah.
So
If
yeah,
I think that if production feels boring, then I would say congratulations, because you have automated everything and you are just watching at what is happening, just supervising, but not really having emergency interventions. So it's a way of celebrating the activity. And elite engineering is when you automated everything today. We are looking for automation. We give tasks to the AI to automate everything. Then we sit and supervise. If everything under the ground that we created is broken, then it is complicated. And like you said, if the platform will need heroism, like you told me many time ago, we don't need it anymore, but you said, I need a hero calling at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then I went there and I was the hero, but it was because the platform was already broken. So now we are living in a better world.
yeah. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope we we helped show good and bad, what you have to think about. It's not a simple yes no, or um, you know we'll give you some calculation and you can like decide your isolation depth. But I think if we said anything, if you need heroism and you're counting on it as your operating strategy, there's probably already something wrong. And you should.
We had a pill today, a pill for solving multi-headache. So that is the right choice.
Okay. Well, that's our show for today, and thanks very much for attending. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.